You know, we all live in this world that's powered by Moore's law. This idea that our electronics just keep getting smaller, faster, and more powerful every single year. But there's a pretty dark secret hidden inside every single chip, a real downside to all this progress. Our incredible gadgets, they're basically born to fail. And look, this isn't some far-off, crazy theory. This quote from IEEE Spectrum, it tells you something pretty shocking. The very experts, the people actually designing our digital world, they're now grappling with a brand new fundamental problem. Transistors, the building blocks of everything, they actually get old, they wear out. And just so we're all on the same page here, a transistor is basically a microscopic switch. And I'm talking billions or even trillions of them working together to power your phone, your computer, literally everything. They are the absolute heart of all modern electronics. Now this graph really shows the dangerous bargain we've struck. See, Moore's law is always pushing us to the left to make things smaller and smaller. But that red arrow shows the hidden cost. As those components shrink, their failure rate just skyrockets. We've been trading reliability for speed, and well, that bill is coming due. Okay, so here's the game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to unpack that dark side of Moore's law and something called the reliability gap. Then we'll get right into how a chip actually ages, dive into the physics of why it fails, and finally, we'll look at the incredible science being used to predict the exact moment a chip will break. So that brings us to this first huge issue in the industry, the reliability gap. It's this massive difference between the gadgets we use every day and the critical systems that we absolutely cannot, under any circumstances, allow to fail. To really get this, check out this wild example. The US Air Force actually built a supercomputer using over 1,700 Sony PlayStation 3s. Why? Because it was crazy cheap. They were using commercial off-the-shelf parts, the same exact kind of chips that are in your phone or your gaming console. And this kind of thing, it's happening all over the place. Okay, so this slide really puts it in black and white. For our phones, we expect them to last, a few years? If it breaks, it's a pain, sure, but you just get a new one. But for an airplane, a satellite, or a critical medical device, we expect a lifespan of decades, and a failure could be, catastrophic. The scary part is, they're often built with the same consumer-grade parts. And get this, the problem is not just bad. It's getting worse and fast. Real-world data shows that with every new, smaller generation of microprocessors, the failure rate can jump up by a factor of 3. So we're not talking about a slow burn here. This is a risk that's speeding up. So how in the world does a solid piece of silicon actually age? To understand that, we need to meet the 4 invisible enemies of electronics, what you could call the 4 horsemen of failure. All right, first things first, we gotta bust a myth. Most people think that because chips don't have moving parts, they can't wear out. That is just not true. They only work because of the constant, frantic movement of electrons inside, and that constant buzz of activity is literally what wears them down. Okay, so our first horseman is called time-dependent dielectric breakdown, or TDDB for short. Think of it like this. Over a long, long time, tiny little electrical charges get stuck in the insulation layer of a transistor. And eventually, enough of them build up to create a new path, forming a tiny little short circuit that just zaps the transistor, killing it for good. And this diagram right here shows you exactly how that goes down. You can see those individual traps slowly building up in that oxide layer until, bam, they form a conductive path. It really is like a tiny lightning strike forming in slow motion over months or even years right inside the chip. Next up, we've got horseman number 2, electromigration. I want you to imagine the tiny metal wires inside a chip are like riverbeds. Well, the flow of electrons through them is so intense, it's like a raging river that physically pushes the metal atoms themselves downstream, slowly but surely eroding the wire away. And this isn't just some nice little analogy. This is an actual photo, a microphotograph of the real damage. You can actually see where that river of electrons has literally worn away the metal path, creating a gap. And that gap causes a total failure. All right, our last 2 horsemen are kind of a tag team: hot carrier injection and negative bias temperature instability. The easiest way to think about these is like microscopic traffic accidents. Electrons zooming through the transistor get so much energy that they get knocked completely off course and they crash into the insulating walls and get permanently stuck. So you can see what's going on in these diagrams. On the left, with hot carrier injection, super high-energy electrons are literally getting blasted into that oxide layer. On the right, with NBTI, it's heat and electric fields that are yanking charges in and trapping them. The end result for both is the same. They basically clog up the transistor, making it weaker and weaker until it just stops working right. So, okay, we've got these four invisible forces just constantly working to destroy our electronics from the inside out. How do we fight back against that? Well, the answer is a totally revolutionary approach to how we think about reliability. The solution is a total, complete shift in thinking. For decades, the industry used these old-school statistical methods, which was basically just wait for stuff to break and then count the bodies. This new approach is called physics of failure, and instead of counting, it uses the fundamental laws of physics to proactively predict when and why something is going to fail. And here's what that actually looks like. On the left, an engineer feeds the system every single detail you can imagine about the chip. Its size, the materials, even the voltage and temperature it's going to run at. Then, the software, which is built on those physics models, runs a simulation. And on the other side, it spits out this incredibly precise prediction of its failure rate over its entire life. Okay, so here's the million-dollar question. Does this stuff actually work? I mean, it sounds amazing in theory, but can you really predict the future for a microchip? Well, let's take a look at the data. This table, wow, this is just stunning. That field column, that's the actual number of failures they saw in the real world. The predicted column is what the physics of failure tool calculated. Just look at that first line, the DRAM. 689 real failures, and it predicted 730. That's incredibly close. Now look at the old ways, JEDEC and MIL HDB. They predicted 51 and 18. I mean, they weren't just a little off. They were so wrong, it's actually dangerous. And this chart just makes it impossible to ignore. That first bar shows the real failures. The second bar, the physics of failure prediction, is right there with it, incredibly close. And that tiny little sliver over there on the right, that's what the old standard told engineers to expect. It was off by more than 90%. This new method is an absolute game changer. So really, the big takeaway here is this. Moore's law doesn't have to be a deal with the devil. By truly understanding the physics of why things break, we can actually design around those failure mechanisms. We can keep making our tech faster, smaller, and more powerful, and at the very same time, build the super safe, ultra-reliable systems our modern world absolutely depends on. And all this leaves us with a pretty critical question to think about. As we build our future, with AI, with self-driving cars, with missions to Mars, all on top of these impossibly small and complex chips, we really have to ask ourselves, what is the true price of performance? And is that a price we're willing to pay?